G'day you mob, Pete here, and this is another episode of Aussie English, the number one place for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. So today I have a Goss episode for you where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smissen, and we talk about the week's news, whether locally down under here in Australia or non-locally overseas in other parts of the world. Okay, and we sometimes also talk about whatever comes to mind, right? If we can think of something interesting to share with you guys related to us or Australia, we also talk about that in the Goss. So these episodes are specifically designed to try and give you content about many different topics where we're obviously speaking in English and there are multiple people having a natural and spontaneous conversation in English. So it is particularly good to improve your listening skills. In order to complement that though, I really recommend that you join the podcast membership or the academy membership at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get access to the full transcripts of these episodes, the PDFs, the downloads, and you can also use the online PDF reader to read and listen at the same time. Okay, so if you really want to improve your listening skills fast, get the transcript, listen and read at the same time, keep practicing, and that is the quickest way to level up your English. Anyway, I've been rabbiting on a bit. I've been talking a bit. Let's just get into this episode, guys. Smack the bird, and let's get into it. Dad, can I interview you?
Yes, you can.
I made this so long ago.
It's going to cost you a can of Pepsi. Here, cheers.
Cheers, Dad. Happy Australia Day.
Yes.
Although it's in 6 days? 7 days.
7 days. Yes.
I always screw those up because of Anzac Day being on the 25th of April and Australia Day being then the 26th.
And Christmas Day. And
yeah, I always screw them up.
Make a mess here.
I never know. But so we had a request from Instagram user Aniri289. So thank you, Aniri. I'm not sure what your name is. I think it is Anna, but thank you, Anna. So
hey.
Anna sent me this message saying, "Hey, I found you on Spotify in July 2019 when I moved to Australia, and you helped me a lot getting familiar with slang and accents. In 2020, I forgot about the podcasts, but I'm back now in 2021.
Hey, welcome back.
I'm wondering if you've already done a program on Australia Day, or if you can share information about it. So thank you, who I assume is called Anna. So Anna, thank you very much for the request. And I couldn't help myself but harass Dad to get on the podcast.
Yeah, why not?
A wealth of knowledge, a fountain of knowledge.
Jeez, no pressure.
Well, you've experienced probably twice as many Australia Days as I have.
Almost exactly, yes. if we take out the couple of years where neither of us was terribly coherent between the ages of 0 and 2. So
yeah, well, I thought we could talk about how Australia Day is, I guess, well, the history of it, how we would celebrate it individually or personally, as we would celebrate it probably in a very similar sort of way, and maybe also about how other Australians may celebrate it and the contentious issue that is Australia Day. Should we change the date?
Should we change the date?
So do you want to start with the history of Australia Day? How long has Australia Day been around as a celebratory holiday day?
Australia Day as a national holiday has been around for decades.
Yep.
I think it was 1920s or something, but not on the 26th of January initially.
So Australia Day as a day was around, but it wasn't on the day that it's currently on.
Correct.
The day was moved.
So there was a celebration called Australia Day. I think it was somewhere back in the 1920s or 30s. And then that got changed during my lifetime to be on the 26th of January.
Was that in the 80s?
70s or 80s.
70s or 80s.
Yeah. And
man, this is stuff we should know.
Yeah, hey, we did this blind. So I had no preparation for this other than 63 years of experience.
Yeah. Looking.
When was it gazetted as a public holiday?
Yeah. All right. This is probably going to take too long to sit through all this. But yeah, needless to say, it's only been the last 40 or so years, right?
Yes.
Oh, here we go. Before 1994, Australia Day was the closest Monday to January 26th.
There you go.
Okay. There you go.
Yep.
So it has...
As a public holiday.
As a public holiday.
So I think that's probably a bit of the history is that there was always a celebration called Australia Day, but it was just another public holiday. And hence the closest Monday to the 26th, so making it a long weekend at the end of January. And that was just considered to be another holiday. It's only since the sort of late 80s, early 90s, and then obviously it was gazetted in 94, that it would be on the 26th.
So now it's no longer about getting a long weekend close to the 26th.
Now about celebrating.
It's always the 26th, no matter what day that falls on.
Yeah. And I think that is now the contentious part, which we'll get onto later in the discussion, I'm assuming.
Yeah. All right. So what are your sort of earliest memories of Australia Day and celebrating Australia Day?
Yeah, well, as a child, and you may have a similar experience, but as a child, Australia Day was sort of irrelevant because when I was a child, there were no big celebrations, no sort of public fireworks or any big parades or anything like that for Australia Day.
You compare that, I guess, to America's July the 4th, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is Independence Day?
Independence Day, yes.
Not the movie. That's when the aliens come down and they start taking over America.
Well, you can have a holiday for that too. It'd probably warrant one if it had actually happened. So, and because it was at the end of January and it was just another public holiday, it was during school holidays. So, as a kid, it wasn't even a day off school because you were already off school on holidays.
You just have this at the end of Feb or the start of March.
Yeah, exactly right. So it was one of those ones where you just sort of, you're aware of it but didn't take much notice of it.
Yeah.
After it became a sort of thing, obviously in late 80s, early 90s, and then 94 it was officially decided that the date would be the date. Then there were more celebrations around it. And from memory, the time that it really became a thing was the bicentenary in 1988. And so celebrating the 26th of January, and I think that is probably what kicked off, converting, the actual date to being the holiday a few years later. So the bicentenary of Arthur Phillip, the First Fleet, landing in Sydney Cove and deciding that's where they were going to form a colony.
So this occurred on...
That was the 26th of January in 1788.
Yeah. Well, isn't there some sort of a contentious thing that I think a lot of people not misremember because they weren't there, but they misunderstand when Australia was first colonised with when Australia was first, quote unquote, not discovered, arrived at by the First Fleet.
Yes.
Because they sort of potted around. They arrived a few days earlier, I think on the 19th of January, didn't they? And then potter around the coast.
It's disputed because, it varies because there were a number of ships in the fleet and they didn't all arrive together.
Yeah,
so the first landing of Arthur Phillip first landed in Botany Bay on the 23rd or something like that of January. And unlike when Cook had been there in 1770.
This is the cute story that I wanted you to sort of talk about because it's funny.
Cook was there and Joseph Banks, who was the naturalist that was on Cook's circumnavigation expedition, collecting plants and animals and all sorts of things. They decided that this would be a good place to have a settlement. But they didn't decide it on the spot. Joseph Banks decided years later.
In retrospect.
And because...
From memory.
Yeah, because they found there's a lot of lush plant life around the coast. And they found a freshwater stream and they said, this is the place to be.
Yeah.
When Phillip landed there 18 years later, it was middle of summer, dry as a dead dingoes.
Donga.
Look that one up, or we'll do an episode on some more slang.
Dingoes, donga.
And no stream, no fresh water. So Phillip immediately decided that they need to look for somewhere else. Interestingly, when Cook had been there 18 years earlier, after he left Botany Bay, and they were there for some time, a few days,
pottering
around and exploring, and
Banks was running off,
filling up their fresh water tanks, and
getting
so on.
Heaps of samples and the animals and plants.
And then they left and went north up the coast, but they never even saw the opening to what is now Sydney Harbour.
Yeah.
They obviously went straight out of Botany Bay, which is only a few kilometres south of Sydney Harbour. They obviously went straight out of Botany Bay and headed out to sea and then turned north.
Yeah.
And they were probably too far out to sea by the time they turned north. They couldn't see the opening, their heads to Sydney Harbour.
Despite Cook being a really good map maker, he wasn't here specifically to... that was a secondary thing, wasn't it? He was here to discover the southern land.
Yeah, but that was even secondary.
Yeah, okay.
The original thing was to record the transit of Venus in Tahiti, which is why they were here. They came out to the Central Pacific to go to Tahiti to record the transit of Venus. And then the secondary thing is, well, on your way home, go and discover the mythical Great South Land. Which, of course, doesn't exist, except that it is what we now call Australia. But Australia as a continent was already well discovered. You know, Europeans had landed on it for a couple of hundred years. Yeah. And so there was always this, well, there must be a bigger land there. All we've done is jumped on a few little spots, and nobody knew whether that was a continent, a few islands, or whatever. So Cook was there to discover the undiscoverable.
Which had already been discovered
tens of thousands of years ago, and by Europeans, and I suspect lots of Asians as well, because certainly the North Coast have what we now call Indonesians, and the Melanesian population of the islands and the Polynesians probably got here as well. So all that aside, they didn't know about Sydney Harbour. So Arthur Phillip and a couple of his mates jumped in a cutter, I believe. It was one of the small boats, combination rowing and sailing boat, and they just cruised up the coast to find somewhere else, went into what we now call Sydney Harbour.
We're like, jackpot.
And went, okay, this is the best deep water harbour in the world, they said, and it probably is.
And you want to sort of describe the reason they thought it was so good was, unlike Port Phillip Bay, which is this sort of, it's got a tiny little mouth opening, and then it's kind of this, not spherical, circular 2D, circular bay. Yeah. The difference is that Port Jackson is more like a Christmas tree.
Yes.
Right, where you have these
lots of little
branches
and
coming
bays
off.
And
so there's so many places for settlements
right.
and ships to sit and everything like that.
And it's very well protected.
Yes.
Whereas Port Phillip Bay, which they didn't know about at the time, but Port Phillip Bay is open and it's shallow. So ironically, it's actually much harder to sail around Port Phillip than it is in Sydney Harbour because it's protected and it's deep water. So they found what we now call Sydney Cove, which is where, and for those of you who have not been to Sydney before, everybody will be aware of it because it is now where the Opera House is and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So it's that little bit of water between the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House where all the ferries come in, and it has the major cruise ship terminal in there as well. So it's probably the most famous bit of water in Australia, and that's where the original settlement was, and they first landed there. They actually came and went back down the coast in their cutter and said, we found a better place, and jumped in a ship, and then Phillip came and said, this is where we're going to be. And that was the 26th of January 1788.
Yeah, so anyway, I guess the main point is that a lot of people confound the First Fleet arriving in Australia as the reason that we have Australia Day on the 26th, but the First Fleet actually arrived in Australia
a few days before
probably weeks before, because they hit Tasmania and then went north, didn't they? Or at least the southeast part.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they landed, but they certainly would have arrived
yeah.
and then tottled their way up the coast.
Yeah, so before the 90s, do you remember when you were an adolescent or even a young adult celebrating Australia Day on whatever day that was? Or
Australia Day was that Monday around the 26th. So it was a public holiday, but as I said, it didn't really mean much when you're a school kid and you're already on holidays anyway. You're aware of it. People would say, oh, it's Australia Day, the holiday today. And, then people go, oh, what's Australia Day about? Oh, it's celebrating Australia.
That's the weird part about it, I think, to interrupt you there. What did people celebrate back in the day then? Like when you were younger? Because
nothing.
Yeah. It still seems to be, I mean, you get this sort of yobbo, bogan, like fiercely proud Caucasian Australians who are just like, yeah, Australia. celebrate Australia.
That's very recent. That's the last 30 years.
Yeah, I was wondering. So I'm wondering, like, how long has that been a thing? Because
it wasn't a parochial holiday in the sense of, hand over your heart and, sing the national anthem sort of stuff.
Similar to
Ironically, then
America.
we didn't have a national anthem, but, when I was a kid, our national anthem was God Save the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it really wasn't that sort of parochial celebrate the country. It was just another holiday. It was notionally celebrating, but it wasn't a big deal. Post this is where we got to, was the 1988, the bicentenary, so 200 years since the first fleet settled. That was a big thing. So, there was a decade of planning around a whole lot of events that would culminate in, a big celebration of that bicentenary on the 26th. And so, there were reenactments, there were tall ships. A fleet of tall ships sailed from England to Australia and, those sort of things. In fact, we've got photographs of you as a little kid down on the beach near your grandmother's place and with the ships sailing into Port Phillip Bay and sailing around there. So, and then they moved up to Sydney a few days later and had the reenactment of the landing and all that sort of hoo-ha.
It is one of those things where you kind of see that, and I think as an older person now, when I was younger, I would have been like, you're wankers. This is so lame. Like, why would you want to watch these boats come in? But now I would have the fascination of, I'm really curious to understand the ships that these people would have come to Australia on, the living, the experiences that they would have had, the living conditions that they would have been under, and everything like that, more so than, oh my God, I'm so proud to see the British invading Australia and making it theirs. Like, it's much more a curiosity of history for me than...
Yeah, I agree. I'm the same.
Yeah. So people weren't, until more recently, you say, as sort of vociferously proud Australians on Australia Day. It was more just, this is, the day where we celebrate that Australia is a country and it was colonised and everything like that.
And that was the end of it. Yeah.
The thing, I guess, that sort of irks me with the more recent uproar and the sort of let's change the date and all of the contentious sort of issues that we have around this thing now, because you have people on both sides, it seems, saying, it's an incredibly racist day. It's Invasion Day. It's a horrible thing. We shouldn't be celebrating it. All the way to, the other extreme of white supremacist Australians being like, we should be proud to have, done this and it should never change in any way, shape or form, despite us not having any real understanding of the history of this day.
Exactly.
And the fact that it's changed a lot. I find myself sort of irritated, though, with this discussion. I mean, I remember originally having these arguments with you about, the day's always been like this. And I guess, now looking at it, it's like it has been for the limited amount of time that I've been on this earth. But that's not really an argument for keeping it the same as it's always been. And I am was and still am relatively ignorant about how others view and celebrate Australia Day outside of my own sort of circle. So when did you first start noticing people criticising Australia Day as a celebration, and how has that criticism grown over the years?
Look, I keep going back to 1988, I think, that bicentenary, because there was a small but loud opposition from Indigenous people to celebrating, the huge amount of time and money and effort that went into that celebration, which they as in the Indigenous population in Australia they say always, and I'm not going to argue with them, I just probably wasn't taking much notice up until then, have always said this is Invasion Day. That celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January is really, for them, it's an Invasion Day. It wasn't an arrival day. It was the end of the lives of those people 200 years ago as they knew it.
Well, this is the thing that I wanted to flesh out, because I find that sort of argument somewhat, it is convincing, and I do definitely understand it now, but at the same time, I find it a bit of a straw man at times, where I don't think anyone, at least that I know personally, celebrates that day because they're happy that British people arrived in Australia, and that led to the invasion of the country and the direct or indirect extermination of many groups of Indigenous people who'd been there for thousands of years. I don't think anyone is ever like, oh, finally the holiday comes around and we can celebrate, almost exterminating Indigenous Australians. So I find that irritating at times because it's a sort of, it doesn't get at what the actual issue is. I feel like at times it's kind of it's just sort of a superficial way of throwing shade at people for celebrating. Yeah, look,
I see that point of view. I think the challenge for me is more that it's not about celebrating the date as in the anniversary of Philip's first fleet arriving.
Yeah.
That is worthy of its own celebration. If they change the name and call it Arthur Phillip Day, I think that would be very different. Because if you call it Australia Day, then it should be a day for all Australians. Mm-hmm. And there's not any group that is more important than anybody else, but ultimately, if you were going to nominate a group of people who were more important, it would be our Indigenous people. To say, they've been here for 60,000 years. If what we are doing is creating a national holiday and saying it is a holiday for all Australians, and they don't like it, then we should move it.
Well, and I can imagine it does somewhat seem triggering if that is the day when effectively everything started to end for your entire, group of people in your history.
Yeah.
But I guess also there's an argument that it's only really a day for the people who were represented by those who arrived on the first fleet.
Yes.
And so all of the immigrants after the fact aren't necessarily represented by Arthur Phillip. So, although it is ironic because I think our history is we didn't come as convicts. We weren't.
We
weren't first settlers or anything like that. We came 100 years or whatever later, right?
Yeah.
But we still see Arthur Phillip as being sort of an extension of our culture. Right?
Yeah, and the Phillip is an amazing historical character and highly not even misunderstood, just not known about. Most Australians, certainly my age and your age could tell you, who was the first person to land in Australia and form a settlement from Europe, and people would go, oh, it was Arthur Phillip, the first fleet, and that's about the end of it. And they might know a little bit of pocket history about where the first fleet came from. But he's an amazing character, and the sense of responsibility that he took on for a year at least before leaving, then the voyage, and then taking on this formation of a settlement is an amazing thing to be done and worth celebrating. But I don't think it is worth celebrating as our national holiday because of the reasons that we've talked about. And you're right, we're a highly multicultural society in terms of immigrants coming from almost probably every country in the world to get to Australia. Excuse me. And to say that we're going to celebrate an Englishman and a few thousand convicts, landing here and military people landing here as our national holiday is a bit churlish, I think, to what Australia is today. The other challenge we have is, unlike, say, the United States that has July 4, their Independence Day, that's a day they celebrate as the formation of their country, not people landing there and the arguments about Indigenous people and so on. That's the day they decided that they would declare independence from Britain. And they went and subsequently fought a war to create that. So that date makes a lot of emotional sense to any American, whether your family was there before that or whether your family arrived after that. If you arrived in the last 5 minutes, you can go, I've decided to come to America. America was created with a document written on and signed on that date. Unfortunately, our founding fathers, when we created the country of Australia, we didn't separate from Britain, but we created our own government in Australia. They didn't have the foresight to do anything other than the 1st of January. It was, I think, the calendar was convenient for them to say, we will do it on this day.
Yeah.
So 1st of January 1900, we became a country. And if they'd picked a random day and said it's going to be May the 17th and done it on that day, that would clearly have been Australia Day. But January the 1st is already has its own status. You know, it's the, first day of the new year. It's a public holiday almost everywhere in, the world. And so calling that Australia Day wouldn't have made any sense. So they didn't have the foresight to create a holiday. Not that you start a country in order to create a holiday, but it was, it could have been a little bit different if they'd done that.
So when did the sort of way of celebrating Australia become so synonymous with going to the beach and
Beaches and barbecues
and everything for Australia Day? And well, we can talk about that, but I guess I should also say that because that's the way that I remember it. I remember it being synonymous with you get your mates over, there's Coronas, there's beers,
barbecues and beach. If you live near the beach,
cricket on the beach. Everyone buys all this Australia merchandise and
everything's
stuff.
Either Australian flags or it's yellow and green.
And then radio shows like Triple J sort of created their own sort of ritual or cultural experience where they had the top 100 or the 100 countdown songs for the entire day. So you would end up, I remember doing this a few times, I think, when I was doing turtle research in undergrad. We were going up to Queensland to a town called Bundaberg. We were at Monrepos tagging turtles at night. And then I remember being there for Australia Day and listening to Triple J's top 100 song countdown thing, and it would take the entire day. But it became this sort of ritual that my generation pretty much all went to parties to then listen to the Triple J Hottest 100 countdown.
The last 10 became the big thing.
Yeah, exactly. And, you'd be guessing, which one's it going to be? Which song from this year? So is it going to be? And you would get wasted with mates. But again, you would never be paying any sort of thought to what does it mean to be Australian? How were we founded? What are the Indigenous issues? What's the contention of this holiday? It was never a thought, for better or worse, about those things. It was just, hey, it's an excuse to get to the beach, get wasted, and hang out and have fun with mates.
Yeah. And look, I think that's pretty much what it is now. And yes, we don't have parades. We're not a parade sort of country. But we don't have parades, but we have, hello. Vinka. Come here.
Come on, Noah. You going to come in and say hello?
Can you find your way around?
All right, we've got a guest.
Yeah. Hi. What do you think of Australia Day?
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
As the youngest Australian here.
Hey, Noah, can you say, please?
No.
Jeez, he's so shy.
He is.
Você pode falar, please? Please? Fala,
Mummy,
please?
get me out of here.
Please.
I'm not a performing seal, Daddy.
All right, well, anyone who was watching the video got to see Noah. Everyone listening, sorry about that.
Yeah, got nothing. Oh, you're going to come over here now. All right.
Distraction. So, Noah, it'll be interesting to see what Australia Day means to Noah, I think.
It will, yeah. And look, I think as I was saying, we're not really a parade sort of a country, but there's fireworks and that. And, the Triple J countdown. The Triple J countdown was an interesting one that they actually made the decision to, come here then.
Sorry, I'm getting flashbacks. If any of you guys have seen, if any of you guys have seen the video clip on YouTube of the guy being interviewed on the news show and his kids suddenly open the door and rush in.
Yeah.
And he just keeps interviewing, pretending they're not there.
Yeah.
And the woman comes in and is like, oh my God, and grabs the children and like stuff goes everywhere and she shuts the door. I think the legend is that he had no pants on and so couldn't get up and deal with the kids. but it felt like that. Kel was behind the cameras there, like, come on, Noah, come on. And he's like, no.
Trying not to say anything, yeah. So no parades, but, fireworks and all that sort of hoo-ha.
Yeah.
But we're saying that, we mentioned that Triple J Top 100. It was interesting that they made the decision to do that on Australia Day rather than New Year's Eve, because it would make sense to, particularly as it's a sort of an annual review, saying, what were the top 100, songs in Australia, for that year. But they've chosen to do it on Australia Day as a celebration of Australian music, rather than doing it as a, like everybody else's, the top 20 things that happened this year. And then TV will go, here's the top stupid video clips that we've got. So all that sort of stuff happened and they chose to use Australia Day. I think mostly people still treat it as it's another public holiday. It happens to fall, fortunately for us, in summer. So if the weather is good, you're down the beach or you're in a park or you're in the backyard with the barbecue, a few drinks with your friends and family and stuff. And in the end, that's probably what a national holiday should be about, is, celebrating whoever you are. And whoever you are. And the other thing that happens on Australia Day is that we have citizenship ceremonies. So, anybody who has applied for citizenship, they will be granted citizenship whenever that gets around.
Yeah.
But then if they choose to, they can actually go and, whether it be in some cases the Governor General or the Prime Minister, if you're in the right place, or the Mayor of the city that you're in and so on, will hold a ceremony and you swear allegiance to Australia and get a little certificate that says I'm now an Australian. So, that's a pretty cool thing to do too, I'm sure. I've obviously never done it because I was born here, but
they never gave us anything, no flag, nothing.
No, you got a birth certificate, that's enough.
So when did this huge push for lamb become such a big thing on Australia Day? Because I remember these big Aussie ads with, celebrities being like, make sure that you go and buy some Aussie lamb. Get lamb on the barbie. Go to the shops. Go to Woolies and Coles and get some lamb and chuck it on the barbie. Yeah. When did that start happening for Australia Day?
Probably about 20 years ago. It was clearly a marketing campaign by the Sheep Farmers Association or whoever they are in Australia. The lamb meat market really wanted to push the fact. Well, I'm interrupting myself. I think the first thing is that lamb is often identified as an Australia and New Zealand food. It's available everywhere else.
Kel doesn't really go for it. She's not a fan of lamb, which is, I guess, for any of you guys who don't know, it is baby sheep.
Baby sheep. Well, it's young sheep.
They're
not actually
baby
lambs.
Sheep.
They're usually close to yearlings by the time we eat them, or 3 or 4 months old.
Yeah, so she's not a fan of the taste, though. I don't really.
I love it.
Mind either way. It's just meat.
But it's meat, isn't it?
It's just meat. All meat's good, man, except for seafood.
And I'm a seafood addict.
Yeah.
So I think there's that thing about lamb being an Australian food, which is obviously not true because you can get lamb almost anywhere in the world. But in particular, Australia and New Zealand have a lot of it.
It's a big push of buy this and you are literally supporting the
So I think that
locals.
was the opportunism by the lamb meat marketers, whoever they were, at the time, that just said, hey, we can exploit Australia Day because we know that plenty of Australians are going to be having barbecues, so get out there and eat lamb, was the message. And, they employed a couple of celebrities, one of whom an ex-Australian footballer who became quite famous, probably more famous for the lamb ad than he was as a footballer. But
who was that?
Oh, now you put me on the spot, haven't you?
I assumed you'd know. Sorry.
It'll come to me.
We'll tell you later.
Yeah, I'll ring you at 3 in the morning. And
we'll tell you next year on Australia Day.
By the time this gets into production, we'll put a little thing along the bottom apologising to him for forgetting.
So, moving on then, I guess, to the last stage of this chat about Australia Day. What would the ideal Australia Day be in your personal view?
My personal ideal Australia Day is probably the backyard barbecue with your family and a few friends around, and you sit around and do what you do at barbecues. Chat, drink, eat, chat.
Do you think much about Australia on the day, or it's more
not on the day? I think about Australia a lot, and a lot of the discussions that we have, obviously, in context here, is just not
it's every day. Every day is Australia Day.
So I don't think I will sit there with my hand over my heart and go, "This is about Australia Day." One of the other things that used to be, but isn't because the cricket calendar has changed, is that there always used to be a one-day cricket game. At the Adelaide Oval on Australia Day. So that was part of it. I was down and watched the cricket, particularly if the weather was crap in Melbourne and Adelaide was okay. You could at least watch cricket on TV. So now it's more just, it's not an excuse, but it's an opportunity for a
get together. So what I really meant by that question, though, is what would you... If you were in charge of setting up Australia Day on a certain date, and to make it as Australian as possible, in other words, inclusive for all Australians, which date would you put it on, and how would you make it more inclusive for all Australians, so that everyone can celebrate Australia Day?
Indigenous issues aside, and not aside because I don't think they're important, but we've already talked about them. I think what we do on Australia, we as a community does on Australia Day now, is about what you'd have, is that we're trying to celebrate the the history of Australia and not just the First Fleet landing. And I think having it on the 26th, and we've talked about reasons why and so on, having it on the 26th puts the focus on that, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, because I get sick of hearing about that, to be honest, too. Because you're kind of like, that isn't Australia in a nutshell, right? Like, we arrived, horrible stuff happened after the fact, and it's like, but that isn't the definition of, Australia.
So celebrating the good things about Australia for me is the multiculturalism. A country is people. It's not the land you live on.
We should set it on the day that Kathy Freeman won the gold medal in the 100-metre race.
400 metres at the Olympics in 2000.
Sorry, 400-metre race in the Olympics.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, if I was to do it a date, selfishly, I think the end of January is attractive.
Yeah.
Because it's summer. And if you're going to have a national public holiday, have it in summer. You don't want it in the middle of winter.
Think about the kids, Dad. Make it off the holidays. Yeah, put it into March or something.
You stick it into the next week. I think the suggestions that have been around to say that we will have it on the last Friday or the last Monday of January, or you could do it first week of February as an example. The trouble with making and this is just a purely sort of socio-political thing, the problem with making a public holiday in the first week back at school is that you don't want to go back to school for 2 days. Go, oh, we're on holidays again, because you've just been on holidays for 6 weeks. So I think you have it on that date around that time, not because it's celebrating the 26th of January, but by saying we think it is convenient and worth having. The last weekend in January, we will have Friday or the Monday, and you fix it and say it's going to be like we always have Labor Day as the second Monday in Victoria. Labor Day is the second Monday in March. We know that, and so everybody can plan for that in advance. There are very few holidays that are random, except for Easter, and that's random based on a lunar calendar rather than anything else. But
it might be good to have it associated with a lunar calendar then, to just have it go back and forth, and it's not associated with a specific
we could just
day.
do Chinese New Year and we'd be happy, but that might interfere with another culture and their celebrations.
It's just dominoes.
Yeah.
Man, I had something on the tip of my tongue, but it's all gone.
I mentioned Chinese New Year, and that
that just put me off. That made me laugh too much. Man, it was going to be really insightful. I should just end the interview there and just be like, guys, I had such an insightful comment to give you.
Sorry you missed it.
Okay, so it was. What did you think of the suggestion to have Australia Day moved to May 8th? And why was that suggested? Do you remember?
Yeah. Mate.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a piss. I guess that's sort of a window into Australian humour.
It is.
We should just have it on May 8. Mate. It's like the long mate.
Yeah, like May the 4th.
Star Wars. May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you.
Yeah, I would laugh at that if that actually happened. That would be such a cool, God, Australians are funny.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Well, we have a public holiday for a football game. We have a public holiday for a horse race. Why can't we have a public holiday for an expression?
Yeah. So, anything else to sort of add to this episode regarding Australia Day? What else is worth adding in here and chucking in for Anna? Before we finish up.
Yeah, look, I think this could be one of those ones where you actually ask for suggestions. What would people expect? Either if you're living in Australia, how do you feel about it? But also, if you're not living in Australia, what would your experience of your national holiday in your own country be? And how could you transplant that into what you perceive Australia to be?
I would say my suggestion for if you want to celebrate Australia Day, besides obviously just getting together with mates and really just getting pissed and having fun, you can do that without getting pissed. Having a barbecue.
And you can do that on any day.
Have a barbecue. Yeah, do a fair dinkum Aussie barbecue. Go and find some lamb. Chuck it on the barbie with some prawns, not with shrimps.
Yeah.
Thanks, Americans. Chuck another shrimp on the barbie. But I would also suggest looking into, buy a book. Try and buy a book every single year about Australian history, about Indigenous Australian history, about colonisation, about convicts, about the gold rush. Just educate yourself a bit more, because some of the stories are mind-blowing when you get in there, right? I mean, what's the book that I think was one of the first ones I read about the colonisation of Australia with Arthur Phillip, that was through the soldiers' diaries?
Yes.
What was his name again?
You're doing this to me all the time, aren't you?
And I packed on my... What Contentious?
Ah, got it.
Yes.
Yeah.
What Contentious diaries are very, very insightful as to what a one of the few literate people in Australia at the time, being, you know, an educated officer, was seeing from day to day, and he kind of just reported on, you know, today this happened, you know, we were attacked, this happens, convicts ran off, they murdered someone, we had food, it was drought, whatever it was. And it was just really interesting to, when I first read those, and you sort of get a taste of
and interesting,
Australian history.
We know more about the experience of those first colonisers in that first fleet from Wat Contentious diary than we know from anything else.
Well, there were only
that could be
5
biased.
diaries from that entire event, right? There were thousands of people, most of whom weren't literate, but you had 5 diaries. But again, a lot of it was just, today we did this.
Yeah,
you know,
and Philip
check off.
didn't keep a diary. He kept a journal as the governor.
Yeah.
So he, you know, wrote down major events and things. So from those, we can get a record of dates.
40 bushels of wheat.
Yes.
And 3 sheep died in the frost.
And Fred was had 70 lashes for stealing something. So.
Yeah, that and Fatal Shore is a really good one. And there is another one, again, I can't really remember. I think Indigenous Australians, which is a really interesting one about the plight that Indigenous Australians faced following colonisation, you know, through the late 1700s, the 1800s, and then the early 1900s, and then on to the Mabo sort of more recent land rights stuff. But that would be my suggestion. Go and learn about Australia. Find something to chat to someone. Find out an interesting fact. And just go and educate someone else who doesn't know it. Probably another Aussie who doesn't know about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining us, guys. I hope you have a fantastic Aussie Australia Day wherever you are. And we will see you in the next episode.
We will. Bye for now.
Bye.
Happy Australia Day.
Tooroo. Yeah, happy Australia Day.
See ya.
Alrighty, you mob. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of The Goss. If you would like to watch the video, if you're currently listening to it and not watching it, you can do so on the Aussie English TV channel on YouTube. This is different from the main channel. You'll be able to subscribe to that. Just search Aussie English TV on YouTube. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you can check this episode out also on the Aussie English podcast, which you can find via my free Aussie English podcast application on both Android and iPhone. You can download that for free, or you can find it via any other good podcast app that you've got on your phone. Spotify, podcasts from iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is. I'm your host, Pete. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a ripper of a day, and I will see you next time. Peace!